I still remember the way his voice cut through the office that morning, sharp enough to slice through the little dignity I had left. Clara, you're late again, Mr. Daniels barked, his words echoing across the room. Every head in the department turned toward me, eyes filled with either pity or amusement. He didn't care that the clock read 9:03 a.m. He didn't care that I had stayed until midnight the night before, finishing the quarterly report he had procrastinated on for weeks. To him, 3 minutes late was more unforgivable than all the hours I had sacrificed. I tried to explain. Sir, I was. But he raised his hand, silencing me. Excuses, excuses. You know what your problem is, Clara. You think you're irreplaceable here. Let me assure you, you're not. In fact, every person in this office could do your job better than you. The words stung like acid. Replaceable. That one word lodged itself deep in my chest. I could feel the heat rise in my face as my colleagues exchanged awkward glances. Some of them smirked. Others lowered their eyes, pretending not to notice my humiliation. I clenched the folder in my hands so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I wanted to scream, to shout that I was the reason this office even functioned, that I had fixed more of his mistakes than anyone dared to count. But instead, I swallowed my pride and forced myself into my chair. My heart thudded so loudly I was afraid someone might hear it. Daniels wasn't finished. He leaned against his desk, crossing his arms. His thin lips curved into a cruel smile. If you don't like it here, Clara, don't let the door hit you on the way out. Remember, we can always find someone else. I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from crying. My throat burned, but I refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. Inside my head, my thoughts screamed louder than any words I could speak aloud. After everything I've done, after all the nights I stayed late, after every weekend I gave up for this company, you call me replaceable. That single word kept repeating itself, echoing in my brain. Replaceable, disposable, forgettable. I sat at my desk and pretended to focus on my computer screen, but all I could see was the reflection of my tired eyes staring back at me. Around me, the whispers started. Did you hear what he said? A younger intern whispered to her neighbor. I can't believe she didn't talk back. The neighbor replied, stifling a laugh. Replaceable. Another voice chuckled, repeating the word like a cruel taunt. Every syllable was a dagger. I wanted to storm out of the office right then and there, but something inside me whispered, not yet, don't give him that satisfaction. Wait. So I waited. The rest of the day dragged on in silence. Every email I sent, every report I completed, every chart I double-checked. It all felt meaningless under the shadow of his words. I could see Mr. Daniels strutting through the office, barking orders, belittling employees, and taking credit for work he hadn't lifted a finger to do. He was a tyrant and we were his pawns. But as the hours ticked by, the humiliation I felt began to twist into something else, something sharper, something hotter. Anger. I replayed the moment in my mind again and again, his smug grin, the way everyone looked at me, the sound of my colleagues snickering under their breath. I could feel the humiliation transforming into fuel, into fire. By the time the office clock hit 60 p.m., I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to let this go. I stayed late that night again, even though he hadn't asked me to. I sat in the quiet glow of my computer screen long after everyone else had gone home. My hands trembled over the keyboard, not from exhaustion, but from the storm brewing inside me. And for the first time, I whispered it aloud, the vow that would become the heartbeat of my life for the next year. He thinks I'm replaceable. Fine. Then I'll replace him. The words tasted sweet, almost dangerous. It was no longer about proving my worth. It was about making him eat his own words. As I shut down my computer and walked out of the office into the cold night air, a strange calmness washed over me. I wasn't sure how I would do it yet, but one thing was clear: this was the beginning of my revenge. I didn't always swallow insults the way I did that morning. There was a time when my mouth ran faster than my sense of self-preservation, a time when I thought fairness arrived if you argued beautifully enough. Then life taught me that some conversations are held over years, not minutes, and sometimes the person you're arguing with is time itself. I grew up on the fifth floor of a building that leaned like a tired shoulder into the wind. Mom called it historic. The landlord called it rent-controlled. I called it home even when winter crept in through the cracked windows and we warmed our hands over the open oven door while waiting for the radiator to cuff itself awake. My mother, Elena, carried her pride like fresh bread. It fed us, and it smelled like effort. She worked the morning shift at a bakery and the evening at Mrs. Chang's corner store. When I told her I wanted to study business, The language of the people who decide. She pinched my chin and said, then learn it so well they'll have to listen. My father didn't pinch chins. He pinched his cigarettes between yellowed fingers and pinched his eyes shut when the world asked for more than he had. Victor was a complicated storm system. Sometimes he was sweetness, cracking jokes with a timing that made strangers love him and made us forget the bills on the counter. Sometimes he was absence, the kind that echoed. On his good days, he taught me that numbers tell stories, that every receipt, every ticket stub, every scrawled IOU is a narrative. On his bad days, he left those stories scattered like debts around the apartment, and Mom swept them into a shoebox labeled later. Later came the summer I turned 15 when he simply didn't. The shoebox stayed fat with unsorted later, and Mom's jaw learned a new way to clench. She never badmouthed him. She just talked about keeping promises in the tone of someone describing an endangered species. My older sister, Maya, born with the confidence of a lighthouse, burned bright. She could walk into any room and convince it to agree with her. If I was numbers, she was color. She designed posters for high school plays, painted murals on the stairwell, and collected compliments like they were currency. I loved her the way you love someone who believes the planet spins because she told it to. But a shadow follows every light, and mine was simple: be useful or be invisible. Turns out I could do both. It was Mrs. Chang who slid me the brochure for the City College Scholarship Competition. You are a responsible girl, she said, stamping prices in red ink on cans of beans. Responsible girls get tired if they are not seen. Money helps people see you. I wrote an essay, 20 messy drafts about pricing fairness in low-income neighborhoods, how a 40-cent increase in bread meant an hour less light for some families, and left it under the pillow because our apartment had nowhere to hide important things except where dreams go. I won. The letter came with a number large enough to knock the air out of me and a campus tour date scrawled at the bottom. The first time I stepped into a lecture hall, I felt a particular electricity, like the building ran on ambition and the outlets were the seats. Dr. Patel taught intro to managerial accounting and spoke with the dry humor of a man who knew the punchline to capitalism and refused to laugh alone. After class, he called me over. You solved the allocation case using a method I haven't taught yet. Why? Because the numbers begged, I said, realizing too late how odd that sounded. He smiled the way people smile when they see a smaller version of a fight they once had with the world. He offered me a research assistant job, 60 hours a month. Spreadsheet purgatory, heaven to me. I learned to clean data, to listen to what it doesn't say, to notice when a decimal is a lie. I learned how leaders hide incompetence inside acronyms and how confidence can be reverse engineered from preparation. When Mom fell asleep at the table after her second shift, I traced her palm with my eyes and promised it would hold lighter things. Maya drifted in and out of home during those years, chasing shows, hustles, boys who loved her until morning, galleries that ghosted her in the afternoon. She was furious at the world for not recognizing her fast enough. I was furious at myself for needing the world's recognition at all. We loved each other through slammed doors and shared sweaters. On the night of my graduation, she showed up with paint under her nails and a hug so tight my ribs remembered it for days. You did it, Clarinet, she said. Her nickname for me since we were kids, a joke about how I made numbers sing. Now make them pay attention. The internship at Danforth and Lay came like most good things do, late, conditional, and in an email that started with, "We are excited to inform you." They put me in corporate development where college students go to learn how deals are made and how bridges are burned. Tate hallways, bright lights, coffee as currency. I learned to speed read pitch decks, to recognize when a founder rehearsed empathy, to pretend confidence on 2 hours of sleep. That's where I met him, Greg Daniels. He wasn't my boss yet. He was the vice president who never carried a bag because someone else always did. Clean haircut, stainless steel watch. Lauder like tinsel, pretty pointless somehow everywhere. He noticed my work because he noticed everyone's. It was his strategy, a net wide enough to catch loyalty and gossip and credit. Clara, right? He said, leaning on my cubicle wall like he was letting me in on a good secret. I skimmed your valuation memo. The sensitivity table, smart, compliments deployed with surgical precision make gratitude feel like indebtedness. I said thank you and meant it. He began to assign me small tasks that weren't small. Quick model scrub meant 12 hours of fixing assumptions a senior analyst should have never touched. Add a page or two of market sizing meant a new narrative invented from a handful of limp numbers. But when he presented, He name-checked me as if I'd been invited to the stage. Clara helped, he'd say, like a magician tossing a coin to the volunteer he'd sawn in half. I kept telling myself this is how rookies learn. You accept being invisible until your work makes a noise too loud to ignore. After the internship, the company offered me a full-time analyst role. I printed the offer letter for Mom, who taped it inside the shoebox labeled later, then crossed out the word and wrote, now. The first year was a marathon in a revolving door. I rotated through teams, built things, broke things, learned the office politics version of Morse code, the tap, tap, tap of shoes that mean someone important is approaching. The email reply, all that says, I want witzes, the subject line, quick chat, that is neither quick nor a chat. I watched Greg become SVP of strategy by holding other people's ladders and then climbing past them. In meetings, he never said I, he said we, and he meant me. It took 18 months for the account that would teach me what I needed to know. Stellar Pantry, a mid-market meal kit company with a loyal niche and a logistics problem. We were hired to evaluate strategic options, raise, merge, or sell. The data was dirty, the margins misreported, and the founder charming enough to distract people from both. I sank into the numbers and discovered a waste loop in their packaging, procurement, duplicate orders, and volume discounts left on the table like forgotten change. I built a model that reframed the business from a barely profitable fad into a logistics platform disguised as a meal kit brand. If they fixed procurement and spun up a B2B arm, their margins could swell by 8 points. I presented the analysis to Greg at 11:42 p.m. in a conference room that smelled like dry erase markers and burnt ambition. He read in silence, line by line, like a man trying to decide whether to adopt a stray idea. This is impressive, he said finally, the compliment so careful it might break. We'll bring it to the partner meeting tomorrow. We did. I watched him pitch my work with the smoothness of someone born to sound right. He said, or team found, and we believe. And I challenged Clara to pressure test the downside, and the partners nodded in a rhythm I wish belonged to me. After, in the hallway, he squeezed my shoulder. Couldn't have done it without you. Then he walked into a glass office and closed the door with a soft click that sounded like a boundary. 2 weeks later, emails boomeranged with subject lines that felt like sunlight. Client loved it. Great work, team. Potential board seat if deal closes. At the bottom of the thread, a stray line from human resources. Comp changes will be reviewed at mid-year. I don't know why that line felt like a ripcord, but I pulled it. I spent a weekend cataloging the last 9 months, my models, my late nights, the projects where my fingerprints were everywhere but my name wasn't. On Monday, I asked for a meeting. Greg said, let's do Friday. Bring your list. I brought it, printed, tabbed, highlighted. He skimmed, then placed it on the table like a menu he wasn't hungry for. The problem with lists, he said, is that they're about the past. I need you in the future. Then put me there. I said before I could shape the heat of it into diplomacy. Led on the stellar transaction. Visibility with the board. Clear path to senior analyst. He steepled his fingers. You're talented, Clara. But leadership is more than spreadsheets. It's presence. It's knowing when to push and when to support. Some people are born with it. Others, he let the sentence trail off like a threat forgiven. Let's revisit at year end. On the elevator down, I stared at our reflections, the practiced ease of him, the practiced patience of me, and thought, if leadership is presence, then why do I disappear in rooms my work built? The months that followed were a masterclass in erasure. I would draft a narrative, he would deliver it. I would map a risk, he would own the mitigation. I consoled myself with the idea that proximity is apprenticeship, that learning to orbit power teaches you gravity. But gravity also teaches you what happens when you break free, people fall. Outside the office, life insisted on happening. Mom's blood pressure flirted with numbers that made doctors frown. We added another pill to a lineup that looked like a gradient of small, precise confessions. She refused to miss work. People need bread, she said, and so do we. I started bringing her grocery store flowers on Fridays because color felt like therapy you didn't have to talk about. Maya drifted closer for a while, taking a job painting set backdrops for a children's theater. She and Mom would sit at the tiny kitchen table, drinking tea that stained our cups and arguing about whether art could pay the light bill. I stood at the sink calculating kilowatts and rent increases and wanted so badly for numbers to be enough to save the people I loved. And then there was Noor. We met in a professional women's group that marketed itself as a power circle, which is to say it had wine, business cards, and a hashtag, nor was a product manager at a growing fintech. All black turtlenecks and bright opinions. She asked good questions and didn't blink at bad answers. We started meeting on Thursdays at a cafe that specialized in pastries that tasted like vacations. I told her about Greg. She told me about a VP at her company who believed feedback was a synonym for micromanagement. People like that build glass houses, she said, sipping coffee. Show up with a bag of stones. A joke that lodged itself in me as permission. It was Noor who first said, "What does your next seat look like?" Not the one they'll give you, the one you'll take. I didn't know how to answer then. I was still trying to be grateful. Gratitude is beautiful until it becomes a leash. The week before everything cracked, Mom called me at lunch to say the bakery changed ownership. New hours, new manager. He's fine, she said, until he isn't. I knew that tone, how women in my life coded instability as weather. I promised to stop by. That night I found her at the bakery, hand on her lower back, smiling through a migraine. I'll be fine, she said. I'm a tough old cookie. You're not old, I said. And even cookies crumble? The morning I was 3 minutes late, the morning that set a fuse to everything. I had sat with her longer than usual. The bus arrived late. Life stacked small dominoes so neatly that the last one looked like fate when it fell. Greg's humiliation wasn't about punctuality. It was about reminding the room who allocated dignity. After everyone left that evening and the office turned into a library of humming machines, I stayed. At first, I stayed out of habit, the way you walk the same road home even after you've moved. Then I opened a blank document and typed a title that felt both too much and not enough, or Succession Case for Clara Reyes. I stared at it and laughed at my audacity, which immediately felt like a kind of health. I began to write not a plea, not a list of grievances, but a strategy. What would it take to be undeniable? What would it take to make my presence a budget line, not a favor? I mapped the company like a city where power eats lunch, where decisions pretend to be discussions, which doorways are choke points. I identified projects that were quietly unnowned because they were messy, the integration playbook the partners kept promising to clients and never delivered, the internal cost analytics that would save millions but require stepping on toes, the client churn analysis no one wanted because it might conclude we were the reason. By 200 a.m., I had a plan with verbs: build, audit, deliver, publish, not inside the shadows of Greg's slide decks, outside them where the work would have its own address. I didn't need his permission to draft a playbook if I started with interviews and existing documentation. I didn't need his blessing to clean internal cost data if I asked finance for an extract under the guise of standardization. I didn't need his spotlight if I learned to build my own. 2 days into this quietly disobedient architecture, I ran into Linda from HR in the elevator. She had the weary warmth of someone who has taught too many people how to be polite for a living. You look purposeful, she said, pressing the button for 12. I considered telling her I was staging a one-woman coup and settled on, trying to be useful. She glanced at my badge, at the floor indicator at the ceiling. Just remember, useful is often invisible. Make sure your work has signatures. The elevator dinged and delivered her into a hallway that smelled like policies. I took her advice literally. I created an internal workspace on Confluence titled Integration Playbook, Verdi.1 Draft for Review. I added my name, the date, and a link to a shared folder. I built tables of contents, placeholders, and the kind of skeleton that compels a body to appear. Then I sent 6 calendar invites, short, pointed interviews with people who knew where the real operations lived. I invited people across silos, sales ops, finance, supply chain, even a senior counsel who terrified half the office and secretly loved to explain things. In every invite, I included Greg so he couldn't claim secrecy, and titled it innocuously, Knowledge Capture for Client Delivery. He declined each one. Fine. Declines are receipts, nor reviewed my outline over pastries. This is excellent, she said, and dangerous. Good, I said, and surprised myself by meaning it. She tapped a paragraph. Don't just write a playbook. Use it on a live fire. Take a client whose last project dragged and prove we could have saved them 6 weeks and 7 figures if we'd done X, Y, Z. Then put the model next to the story. A comparison. A before-after. Even non-numbers people respect a ghost of what could have been. I left that cafe with sugar on my lips and a map in my head. At home, Mom was nodding off in front of a game show, the host's smile like laminate. I tucked a blanket around her and kissed her forehead. She opened one eye. You're doing the face, she murmured. What face? The one you had when you decided to ride the big kid's slide even though you were tiny. You marched up there. Did I cry? You screamed the whole way down, she smiled. Then you climbed back up. I went to bed with her blessing in my bones. Over the next 3 weeks, my days split into two lives. In Greg's, I was the perfect analyst, responsive, precise, grateful. In mine, I built the bones of a department he thought belonged only to him. I combed through post-mortems that were really euphemisms, alignment issues, external delays, scope clarification, and translated them into metrics with byte approval cycle times, decision latency, handoff failure rates. I designed dashboards that told stories even to people allergic to charts. I mocked up a one-page client briefing template that made our old ones look like apologies. I didn't hide any of it. I shared links with stakeholders, updated the workspace transparently, sent weekly progress notices that read like letters from the front. People began replying. This is exactly what we've needed. Can you include a section on vendor onboarding? Finally. The word finally is a quiet indictment. I collected them like pearls. Greg noticed the noise before he noticed the source. He started replying to my progress notes with vague encouragements that sounded like ownership. Great momentum, team, he wrote on one, though the team was me, a spreadsheet and a set of headphones. In meetings, he referenced or playbook, and I watched partners nod as if they recognized it. Once, when I presented a small slice to a cross-functional group, he crashed the Zoom 5 minutes in and took over the screen share with a smile so fixed it squeaked. Afterward, he messaged me, "Awesome that you kicked this off. Let's sync on messaging so we're aligned." Aligned is how people say obedient when they're decorating it. I kept going, not because I was brave, but because I was tired. Tired of asking, tired of permissions choreography, 2 steps forward, 3 apologies back. Tired of being told I had potential like it was a debt I owed them to eventually repay. One evening, as twilight smudged the city outside the office windows, I printed a draft of the playbook, hundreds of pages that smelled like warm paper and promise. Maya stopped by my desk, pain on her jeans, eyes bright. "Whoa," she said, flipping through. "Is this your brain on trees? This is the thing that will either promote me or get me yelled at." She looked at me over the stack. "Or both?" She slipped a small watercolor into the folder, an abstract of lines intersecting in chaotic grace. "For the cover," she said, "so they remember a person made it." That night I dreamed of doors. Some open to rooms filled with light, some open to mirrors. One open to a stage where a voice, mine, read a sentence I hadn't written yet. "He thinks I'm replaceable." Fine. Then I'll replace him. When I woke, the sentence followed me into the shower, into my coffee, into my commute. It felt less like a threat and more like a prophecy. Not because I was better than him at everything, but because I was willing to be better at the one thing that mattered here, building something other people could not ignore. 2 days later, an email hit my inbox at 7:13 a.m. from Martin Hale, the managing partner. Subject line, Integration Playbook Preview. He'd been CC'd on one of my progress notes. Someone had forwarded, power had turned its head. "Heard good things," the email said. "Could you give me 30 minutes Friday to walk me through?" I stared at the screen, hands suddenly so light they felt borrowed. I forwarded the calendar invite to Greg. He replied in under a minute, "I'll take this one. Thanks, Clara." The familiar heat rose in my throat, that old, practiced swallowing. I considered letting it pass, the way you consider staying in a burning room because the exit looks rude. Then I remembered Linda, "Make sure your work has signatures." I breathed, typed, and pressed send. "Happy to have you join, Greg. Martin specifically asked me to walk him through the draft. I'll bring the team's contributions into the discussion and seek you the materials." No reply for 4 hours. Then, "Let's sync beforehand." The calendar invite arrived like a summons. When the pretty meeting began, Greg stood by the window, the skyline arranging itself behind him like a tailored suit. He smiled, all enamel. "I'm glad you took initiative," he said, "which is what people say right before telling you how to stop. Just be careful with language in front of Martin. You've done good work assembling pieces, but the strategy comes from leadership. We don't want to confuse ownership." I looked at him and saw the map of our relationship, a series of roads that always led back to his house. I thought of Mom, of Mrs. Chang, of Dr. Patel, of Noor's bag of stones, of Maya's painting on the cover of my document. I thought of every night I walked home feeling like a brilliant ghost. The words came out quieter than I felt them. "I'm not confused," he blinked, the smallest, most satisfying blink. "Good," he said, recovering. Then we're aligned? He left messaging unsaid because some power is muscle memory. I returned to my desk and opened the draft one more time. I tightened a paragraph. I changed a heading. I added one sentence to the executive summary, a signature disguised as a fact. This working draft compiles and operationalizes learnings from the last 12 months of engagements led by multiple teams. Initial framework and synthesis by Clara Reyes. It looked bureaucratic. It was a flag. Friday was 2 days away. Between now and then, I would do what I had always done, the work. But something inside me had shifted, tectonic and irreversible. For the first time since he told me I was replaceable, I felt the shape of a future that didn't require his permission. A future where I didn't wait for someone to offer me a chair at the head of the table. I was bringing my own. I packed my bag, turned off my monitor, and paused by the glass wall of Greg's office. He was on the phone laughing. Tinsel sound, I caught my reflection behind him. Small, focused, too stubborn to be erased, and heard my mother's voice as if the building itself had learned her accent. Keep your promises. I promised to stop asking who I needed to be allowed in. On the street, the city breathed around me, indifferent and full of room. My phone buzzed. Nor, you ready? I texted back yes, and I'm done apologizing for it. Then I slid the phone into my pocket and walked toward a Friday that would decide something I had been deciding all along. The conference room smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and anxiety when I walked in Friday morning. Martin Hale sat at the head of the table, glasses perched low on his nose, the kind of man whose silence intimidated more than other people's shouting. A few partners shuffled papers. Greg sat 2 seats down, posture so straight it looked rehearsed. He smiled at me with the kind of politeness you offer before a duel. Clara, Martin said, gesturing at the chair beside him. I've heard good things. Show me what you've got. My palms tingled, but I placed the thick binder on the table and slid a copy to him, to each partner, to Greg. My name stared up from the cover. Integration Playbook, draft prepared by Clara Reyes. I took a breath. This is a framework designed to address the inefficiencies we've seen in post-merger integrations. It's based on 12 months of engagements, mapped to measurable outcomes. The goal is consistency, speed, and accountability. Greg cleared his throat lightly, as if to insert himself into the space between my words. Of course, this was a team effort. Clara has been very helpful in pulling together our thinking. Martin raised one hand, silencing him without looking up from the pages. Let her finish. For 30 minutes, I walked them through bottlenecks, cycle times, handoff failures. I showed them charts, timelines, and a case study of a client project that bled 6 weeks because no one owned a single decision point. Then I laid out how the playbook would have prevented it. By the time I closed with projected savings of 12.6 million across 3 years, the room was silent. Martin tapped his pen against the binder. This, he said finally, is good work. Very good. Why don't we already have this? The question landed like a knife, and every eye turned to Greg. His smile flickered, then returned. We've been conceptualizing it for some time, he said smoothly. Clara accelerated our efforts. I bit the inside of my cheek. Our efforts. He had just reduced months of my midnight labor into an acceleration. Martin nodded. Well, accelerate faster. I want this polished and ready to present to clients by next quarter. Clara, you'll lead the working group. The words rang in my ears like church bells. Lead me. Not shadow, not support. Lead. Greg clapped lightly, the gesture more performance than praise. Excellent. I'll supervise to make sure alignment with our overall strategy stays tight. The partners gathered their binders and filed out, leaving Greg and me alone. He turned to me, smile tight enough to cut glass. That went well. Nice job. Now, we'll need to be careful about scope creep. Don't overpromise. And remember, I'll be the one presenting this to the executive committee. I blinked. Martin just asked me to lead? Less, Greg said. Led the grunt work. But leadership is about visibility, and visibility is mine. Don't confuse the two. I left the room with my pulse pounding. His words stuck to me like Burr's grunt work. Visibility is mine. Over the next weeks, escalation became the new normal. Every time I scheduled a workshop with cross-functional teams, Greg inserted himself at the last minute, taking over introductions and claiming the initiative as his. When finance praised the new dashboards I designed, he replied all with, yes, part of the vision I've been driving. When an external consultant emailed me directly for details, he forwarded the chain to the partners with a note, I'll handle this. The more visible my work became, the more aggressively he smothered it with his shadow. One afternoon, I overheard him on the phone in his office, his door ajar. Yes, I've been mentoring Clara. She's got potential, but she's not client ready yet. Too detail focused. Not enough big picture leadership. I'm grooming her, though. She'll get there under my guidance. My stomach dropped. Grooming. He was positioning me as his protege. The convenient narrative that explained why I did all the work, but he got all the glory. That evening, I stayed late again, the office deserted. I sat at my desk staring at my reflection in the black computer screen, my fists clenched until my nails dug half moons into my palms. Inside my head, I screamed the words I couldn't say out loud. You're not grooming me. You're stealing from me. But outside, I stayed silent. At home, Mom noticed the dark circles under my eyes. Clara, you look like you're carrying bricks. I'm fine. I lied. She touched my hand. Don't let anyone take credit for your bread, Mija. You're the one kneading, sweating, waiting. The loaf belongs to you. Her words warmed me, but at the office, the air stayed cold. Things worsened when Stellar Pantry's merger deal moved forward. Greg positioned himself as the hero of the project, parading around the integration playbook as his innovation. He assigned me endless revisions, demanding I reframe the narrative to match his talking points. When I pushed back, he leaned in close, his voice dropping. Don't forget, Clara. This company sees me as the strategist. You're the analyst. Stay in your lane, or you'll get run over. The humiliation spread like ink in water. Colleagues began whispering behind my back. She's smart, but she'll never move up. Greg won't allow it. Others started avoiding me, afraid association with me would put them on Greg's bad side. The final straw came during a town hall meeting. Martin congratulated the team on the stellar deal and asked Greg to present the integration approach. I sat in the audience, stomach knotted, as Greg clicked through my slides, my charts, my case studies. He didn't mention my name once. The applause at the end was thunderous. I clapped too, my hands trembling, tears stinging my eyes. I wanted to stand up and scream. It was me. I built that. I made it possible. But my voice felt trapped under the weight of every dismissal, every replaceable he had ever thrown at me. That night, I walked home in the rain, mascara streaking down my cheeks, the city lights blurred into smudges. I felt like the smallest person in the world. When I reached my apartment, Maya was sitting cross-legged on the couch, sketchbook in her lap. She looked up and froze. Clara, what happened? I collapsed beside her, sobbing. He stole everything. Again. He made it look like his. She hugged me tight. Then you can't play fair anymore. Her words lodged in my chest like a seed. And for the first time, I didn't dismiss it, because deep down, I knew she was right. This wasn't just about humiliation anymore. It was about war, and I was done playing by Greg Daniels' rules. I used to think revenge was childish, something people whispered about but never really acted on. My mother raised me to believe in hard work, in patience, in letting the truth eventually surface. But as I sat in my tiny apartment that night, silked from the rain and still trembling from the humiliation at the town hall, I realized something brutal. The truth doesn't surface on its own. It's buried under the weight of men like Greg Daniels. If I wanted it unearthed, I'd have to dig with my own hands. Maya was still curled up beside me, holding my wrist like she was afraid I might unravel completely. Clara, she said softly, you can't let him keep taking what's yours. He'll never stop. You know that. I looked at her, my vision blurry but my voice steady. Then I'll stop him. The words felt dangerous, foreign, but also finally mine. That night I didn't sleep. Instead, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, building blueprints in my mind. This wasn't about screaming in his face or quitting in some dramatic blaze. No, if Greg saw me break, he'd win. My revenge had to be smarter, precise. I had to make him collapse under the weight of his own arrogance. By dawn, I had whispered my vow out loud. I will replace him, not just survive him, replace him. The next morning, I walked into the office with a strange calmness. My coworkers glanced at me warily, probably expecting the same broken woman from yesterday. But I smiled, even as my heart burned, because now I had a plan. Step 1, information. I started small. I began documenting everything. Every email, every message, every meeting where Greg claimed credit for work I had done. I forwarded notes to my personal email, careful to disguise it as normal follow-up. I saved drafts of my models with timestamps, screenshots, and version histories. The more evidence I gathered, the clearer the picture became. Greg was nothing without me. Step 2, allies. I knew I couldn't do this alone. Greg's reach in the company was wide, but so was the frustration he left in his wake. He belittled analysts, ignored project managers, and dismissed anyone who dared challenge him. Quietly, I started listening. Over coffee breaks and hallway chats, I asked subtle questions. How's your team holding up? Have you had trouble getting sign off from Greg? It didn't take long to uncover the resentment bubbling under the surface. One by one, people confided in me. Every time we suggest something, he shuts it down until he presents it later as his own idea. He books meetings and makes us wait like children outside his office. He's toxic, Clara, but no one wants to risk their job calling him out. I nodded, hiding the satisfaction that bloomed inside me. He had made enemies everywhere. He just didn't know it yet. Step 3. Greg thrived on stealing the spotlight, so I needed to build one he couldn't stand in front of. I started publishing weekly internal updates, short, sharp summaries of integration progress with metrics, charts, and highlights. I framed them as transparency reports, meant to keep the whole firm aligned. I signed everyone with my name. At first, Greg tried to intercept them, replying all with his strategic commentary. But people began responding directly to me, thanking me for the clarity, for finally making the work understandable. Slowly, my name began to stick. Step 4, patience. I knew I couldn't strike too early. If I lunged, I'd lose. Greg was too entrenched, too skilled at spinning narratives. I had to let him build his own downfall, brick by brick, until my evidence and allies were enough to topple the whole structure. But fate, as always, moved faster than I expected. 2 weeks later, Greg called me into his office. He was leaning back in his chair, fingers steepled, that smug grin plastered on his face. Clara, he said, I've decided to nominate you for the Emerging Leaders Program. It's a development track for high potential staff. You'll get some training, some mentoring. Good exposure. My stomach turned. On the surface, it sounded like a compliment. But I saw it for what it was, a leash. If I accepted, he'd control the narrative even more tightly. Greg the mentor, Clara the grateful student. I forced a smile. That's generous. Thank you. He nodded, satisfied. Of course. Just remember who's guiding you. Loyalty matters in this business. The word loyalty curdled in my ears. He didn't want to elevate me. He wanted to brand me with his name. As I left his office, I whispered under my breath, enjoy your power while it lasts. That night, I called Noor. She listened quietly as I unloaded everything, the humiliation, the evidence, the plan forming in my head. When I finally paused, she said simply, you're ready. Ready for what? To stop playing defense. It's time you made a move. Her certainty lit a spark in me. For months, I had been reacting to Greg, always trying to claw back what he stole. But she was right. If I wanted to win, I had to set the board myself. The next day, I booked a meeting with Martin Hale. I prepared for hours, crafting a presentation that didn't just showcase my work, but painted a vision for the firm's future. I included numbers, yes, but also stories, proof of how employees were being drained by Greg's leadership style. I didn't name him directly, not yet, but I made sure the message was clear. The firm needed fresh leadership, a new kind of strategy. When the day came, I walked into Martin's office with my binder tucked under my arm. My heart raced, but my voice didn't tremble. Martin, I said, meeting his eyes, you once asked me why we didn't already have an integration playbook. The truth is we did. I built it, and I can build more. But I can't do that if my work keeps disappearing under someone else's shadow. His expression didn't change, but he leaned forward slightly. Go on. So I did. For 30 minutes. I laid out not just what I had done, but what I could do, how I could expand integration into a full department, how we could streamline mergers across industries, how we could become known for efficiency that saved clients millions. By the time I finished, my hands were trembling, but I kept them folded in my lap, hiding it. Martin didn't speak for a long time. Finally, he said, that's ambitious, Clara. Very ambitious. I know, I said, but I'm ready. He nodded slowly. I'll be watching. Show me results. As I left his office, adrenaline surged through me. This was it, the beginning of the end for Greg. From that moment, I doubled down. Every report I sent, every meeting I held, every piece of progress I documented. I made sure it was undeniable, traceable, mine. I stopped asking for permission and started claiming authority. And slowly, the tide began to turn. People stopped looking to Greg for answers and started coming to me. Analysts began copying my templates. Project managers asked for my input directly. Even some partners began seeking me on emails instead of him. Greg noticed. Oh, he noticed. The more visible I became, the more desperate he grew. His temper slipped in meetings. His jokes landed flat. His smile tightened. He started sending me condescending late-night emails, criticizing small formatting errors, accusing me of being too ambitious. But I didn't flinch. Not anymore. Because for the first time, I wasn't afraid of him. For the first time, I was planning not just to survive Greg Daniels. I was planning to bury him. The first domino fell on a Tuesday morning. It was subtle. So subtle Greg didn't even notice it at first. But I did. I had been laying the groundwork for weeks, gathering evidence, building allies, and carefully positioning myself as the silent backbone of every project. Greg had grown accustomed to parading my work as his own, certain that no one questioned his authority. But authority is fragile when it's built on theft, and all it takes to shatter it is light. That morning, I sent out my usual integration transparency report, only this time I included a brand new section: team contributions. A neat table outlined the specific pieces of work produced by each analyst, project manager, and associate. My name appeared on nearly every line, tied to dashboards, models, and playbook updates. Greg's name? Nowhere. At first, no one said anything, but then the replies started. Excellent breakdown, Clara. So helpful to see the attributions. Great work, Clara. Didn't realize you were leading so much of this. Impressive scope of contributions. Well done. The recognition spread like wildfire, and for the first time, Greg couldn't redirect it. His shadow had nowhere to hide. By Thursday, I saw the cracks in his facade. He stormed into my cubicle, lips pressed tight. Clara, a word. He dragged me into his office and shut the door. What do you think you're doing? I met his glare calmly, reporting progress. Transparently. You're undermining me. No, I said, my voice steady. I'm making sure credit goes where it belongs. You should appreciate that. It reflects well on your leadership, doesn't it? His jaw tightened. He couldn't argue without admitting the truth. So instead, he leaned in, his voice low. You're playing a dangerous game. Don't forget who holds the power here. I smiled, the smallest, coldest smile I had ever allowed myself. Maybe. But power is fragile, Greg. You should be careful with it. He didn't know it then, but that was the beginning of the end. The second domino fell when Stellar Pantry officially closed their merger. Martin Hale called for a client-facing presentation to showcase our integration strategy. Greg assumed, as always, that he would present. But I had prepared differently. For weeks, I had worked late nights refining the playbook, crafting visuals, and rehearsing every line. I sent the deck to Martin directly, highlighting specific results and citing my authorship in the notes. I didn't copy Greg this time. On the day of the meeting, Martin looked around the room and said, Clara, why don't you take us through this? The air shifted. Greg's head whipped toward me, disbelief flashing across his face. But Martin had already gestured for me to begin. I stood, hands steady, voice clear. Slide by slide, I laid out the strategy, the framework I had built, the cost savings we had projected, the roadmap for execution. The clients leaned forward, nodding, impressed. The partners exchanged glances, and Greg, he sat frozen, forced to watch me shine. When the applause came at the end, it wasn't for him. It was for me. I caught his eye as I sat down. His face was pale, his smile stretched too thin. For once, he had nothing to say. The third domino came crashing down harder than I had imagined. I had been collecting evidence for months. Emails, version histories, meeting notes, all showing Greg repeatedly taking credit for my work. Quietly, I compiled it into a dossier. Not bitter, not emotional, just facts. And when the opportunity presented itself, I placed it in the right hands. It happened during a leadership offsite when partners gathered to discuss the firm's future. Martin had invited me to sit in, a sign of growing trust. Greg, of course, was there too, pacing like a general surveying his troops. Halfway through, Martin asked about bottlenecks in client delivery. Greg launched into a speech about his integration playbook, about how he had spearheaded it and mentored me along the way. That was my moment. I slid a folder across the table. Actually, if I may, I said, here's the documented timeline of the playbook's development, emails, drafts, and contributions. It might provide clarity. The partners flipped through the pages, eyebrows rising. Every line bore my name, my timestamps, my fingerprints. Greg's contribution was conspicuously absent. Silence thickened the room. Finally, one partner said, Greg, can you explain why your name isn't attached to any of these drafts? Greg stammered, his usual smoothness unraveling. Well, I supervised. I guided the strategy. Clara just. But the evidence spoke louder than he could. For the first time, the mask slipped, and everyone saw what lay beneath. A man who built his reputation on theft. The downfall wasn't immediate, but it was inevitable. In the weeks that followed, whispers spread through the firm. Partners began bypassing Greg, asking me directly for updates. Analysts stopped fearing him and started rolling their eyes at his demands. His authority leaked away drip by drip until he was left scrambling to patch the holes. Then came the final blow. Martin called me into his office one Friday afternoon. "Clara," he said, his voice calm but firm, "we've been reviewing leadership for the integration practice. The partners are impressed with your vision, your execution, and your transparency. Effective immediately, you'll be promoted to Director of Integration Strategy." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Director, me, and Greg, I asked carefully. Martin's lips pressed into a thin line. "Greg will be transitioning out of the firm. We no longer believe his leadership aligns with our values." I left the office with my heart pounding, adrenaline flooding every vein. It was done. The man who called me replaceable had been replaced by me. The following Monday, the office buzzed with the news. Greg's nameplate had been removed from his door. His office sat empty, stripped of the smug laughter and polished watch that had haunted me for years. People stopped by my office, to congratulate me, to thank me, to finally say aloud what they had whispered for months. "You deserve this, Clara. It's about time." He should have seen it coming. That evening, as the sun set over the city, I stood by the window of my office, gazing out at the skyline. My reflection stared back at me, not the timid analyst who once swallowed humiliation, but a woman who had built her own power brick by brick. I whispered the words one last time, savoring them. He said I was replaceable, but I replaced him instead. And for the first time in years, I smiled without bitterness. The Monday Greg's office door stood empty. It was as if the air in the building changed, quieter, lighter. People walked faster, laughed louder. Even the fluorescent lights seemed less oppressive, though I knew that was impossible. For years, Greg's presence had been like a low-grade fever, constant, exhausting, always there in the background. Now, without him, the office felt like it could breathe again. But for me, the aftermath wasn't simple relief. It was complicated, heavy, layered. When I first sat in my new office, the title, Director of Integration Strategy, etched neatly on the door. I stared at the polished desk and leather chair, both still carrying the faint scent of whoever had occupied them before. For the first time in my life, I had an office with walls, not just a cubicle. My name was on the door, my name. And yet, instead of triumph, the first thing I felt was silence. The kind of silence that makes you realize how much noise you've been living under. I let myself sit in it for a while. Then I thought of my mother. That evening, I brought her to see the office. She walked in slowly, eyes scanning every detail. Her hands brushed over the desk, the framed certificates, the fresh stack of business cards. "Mija," she whispered, "this is yours." I nodded, swallowing hard. "All mine." She turned to me, eyes shining. "Your father, if he could see this, he would be so proud." A lump formed in my throat. For years, I had chased success like it was oxygen, desperate to prove something to the world, maybe to myself. But in that moment, with my mother's hand resting on my shoulder, I realized who I had really been proving it to. Her. The woman who had carried bricks on her back so I could build towers. I hugged her, breathing in the familiar smell of bread and laundry soap. "This is for you, Mom. Always for you." Greg's downfall, meanwhile, wasn't quiet. Rumors swirled. Some said he had been forced to resign. Others claimed he had been escorted out after a shouting match with Martin. I didn't care to know the details. All I knew was that he was gone. Occasionally, I caught wind of his name in industry gossip. He had tried to interview at a competitor, but word traveled fast. No one wanted a leader who stole credit and left behind a trail of resentment. Last I heard, he had taken a consulting role at a small firm, Code for Exile. I wondered if he ever thought about me, about the way he had dismissed me with that single word, replaceable. Did he remember the smirk on his face the morning he humiliated me in front of everyone? Did he replay it now, in some quiet moment, realizing that insult had been the first brick in the wall that would eventually collapse on him? Part of me wanted to know. Another part of me didn't care. Because my life was no longer about him. As director, my days filled quickly. I built the integration department from scratch, just as I had promised Martin. I hired analysts and project managers, people who had once been ignored or dismissed by leaders like Greg. I gave them visibility, credit recognition. In our weekly meetings, I made a rule: every piece of work had a name attached to it, every success celebrated out loud. Slowly, the culture shifted. People began volunteering ideas, no longer afraid of being silenced or stolen from. Productivity soared, yes, but more importantly, Morale flourished. We weren't just surviving, we were thriving. I found myself smiling more often. Not the forced smile of someone trying to hide humiliation, but the genuine smile of a woman who had earned her place. At home, Maya teased me relentlessly. Look at you, boss lady. I should paint a portrait of you in that office. Maybe title it The Woman Who Took Down Goliath. I laughed, but inside I knew she was right. Greg had been my Goliath, and I had brought him down not with brute force, but with patience, strategy, and truth. And yet, despite everything, I carried no regret. Some people might call what I did ruthless. Some might say I should have taken the high road, let karma deal with him. But here's what I learned: karma doesn't always show up unless you give it a map. I gave it that map. I didn't fabricate lies. I didn't cheat or manipulate. I simply pulled back the curtain and forced the world to see the truth Greg had tried to bury. In the end, he wasn't destroyed by me. He was destroyed by himself. I just held up the mirror. That thought gave me peace. One late night, long after the office had emptied, I sat alone at my desk, city lights flickering outside the window. I opened the old folder where I had stored all the evidence against Greg: emails, screenshots, drafts, proof of his betrayal. For months, that folder had been my weapon, my shield, my obsession. Now, looking at it, I felt nothing but release. I dragged it to the trash and clicked delete because I didn't need it anymore. The revenge was complete. The story was finished, and I was free. But freedom comes with reflection. As I walked home that night, I thought about all the people who had told me I was too ambitious, too detail focused, too quiet, too replaceable. I thought about the nights I had doubted myself, the mornings I had cried in the bathroom before plastering on a brave face. And I realized something profound: I had never been replaceable. None of us are really. We are only made to feel that way by people who fear our power, people who see our light and want to smother it so theirs shines brighter. But light doesn't disappear when someone tries to cover it. It only waits, burning silently, until the moment it can blaze through. That was my moment. And now there was no going back. The next week, Martin stopped by my office. Clara, he said, we're considering you for a partner track in the next few years. Keep this momentum. Partner. The word sent chills down my spine. Once, I would have laughed at the impossibility of it. Now, it felt inevitable. After he left, I turned to the window again, watching the city hum with life. My reflection looked back at me. Not a timid analyst, not a humiliated subordinate, but a leader, a fighter, a woman who had learned that revenge wasn't just about taking someone down, it was about rising in their place. And in that moment, I whispered the words one final time, the words that had carried me through every sleepless night, every moment of doubt, every step of the journey. He called me replaceable, but I replaced him instead.